All right, can you guys hear me? All right, you can.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
What's going on? What's going on? All right, guys. So, appreciate you guys coming to the first episode, saying something podcast. Um, you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, sure. Name's Nendo Plays. Man, I'm a Twitch streamer, YouTuber, small streamer. But yeah, I am from the DC area. Been living in the East Coast my whole life, and you know, just a everyday person trying to get more information about what's going on in the world.
I am a man that needs no introduction, but I will give one today. Uh, my name is Mike. I'm from DC. I actually went to high school with Nendo Plays. The 2K King is my alias on Xbox. So, I'm just an everyday guy. Love to have fun. Love to spread love and get love back.
I appreciate it. So, I want to start the stream. I want to start it off with how are you guys feeling today? How are you guys feeling about what's going on in the world right now?
That's a good question. All right. I'm gonna come with a not so popular answer. I feel real bittersweet about what's going on right now. And 2020, people look at 2020 in the grand scheme of things and they're like, bittersweet. What's sweet about 2020? Like there's not much that can be said when you look at it from face value, but when I look at it through a different set of eyes, I'm looking at it from a perspective of like there's a lot of stuff going on in 2020 that's waking people up about what's really going on in the deeper fabric and structure of what's going on in the country. And when I say that, I'm thinking about, like first when we got hit by COVID, like COVID was big and nobody expected it to be this big and, this monumental for people across the world. But when you look at our country in particular, you look at the disproportionality of African Americans that have been affected by COVID. And then people sit back and say, well, I'm not quite sure why that is. Like, do you see this? This is eye opening. This is kind of crazy how this is going on. But when you look at it on a deeper level, you see the systemic proportions of everything that's going on and why it's trickled down into the COVID numbers and why Black people are dying more than other races when it comes to people getting affected by COVID. So that sort of opened up the book. And then, of course, what happened a few weeks ago with just the racial injustice when it came to all these police cases that have sprouted up over the past couple of months has definitely torn the book wide open and has had even more people asking these questions like what's going on, like this is looking a lot stranger than what we had previously seen.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm feeling bittersweet because yeah, it's pretty bitter. 2020's kind of sucked overall,
Yeah, it's
but
been crazy.
the
Yeah,
sweet
super
part
crazy.
that I see is that a lot of questions are being asked now because a lot of band-aids are getting ripped off and a lot of people are getting open to a lot of the things that have been happening systematically over the past century.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that this is bittersweet. A lot of crazy things going on, but a lot of things are being brought to light now.
Yeah, I say for me, 2020 has just been like extremely eye-opening. Um, I agree with everything Nindo said. I think 2020 has been, extremely uncertain, just because it felt like society stopped. When COVID hit, places started to shut down. That was the first time in my life that I've ever had to like quarantine. I never, I never even knew, that could be a reality of having to wear masks. It felt almost like, post-apocalyptic. Um, but yeah, 2020 has just been extremely uncertain because we don't know what the future of the country looks like. Are we ever going to be able to sit down at a bar and restaurants, go to a movie? How is that going to how is the new norm going to translate? I think some places are adapting well, like certain things like instead of having your weekly meetings, you're doing it through Zoom. Some
Mm-hmm.
some positions that could have been remote are starting to become remote. So 2020 has been extremely eye opening, and then I think even on a personal level for a lot of Americans, they've never had this much time, or they've never had to be around their spouse this much, or they've never had to be around themselves as much. You know what I mean? Like 2020 has been just so eye opening. So I mean, it's been extremely difficult. You're realizing a lot about yourself, a lot about the country. Um, so yeah, I mean, and it's tough because we have an election coming up in November, so there's just so much uncertainty and so much anxiety and a lot of questions. How will the BLM movement? How will there be any legislation that comes from this? So it's just it's just a lot right now, a lot on our plates.
I agree. I definitely agree. For me, these last couple of weeks have been really tough. It's brought up a lot of stuff that I've pretty much repressed. Stuff that I've gone through. I find myself, well, not recently, but probably the last couple of weeks, I found myself waking up angry. I think a lot of that had to do with social media, constantly seeing everything that was going on. And I don't know what it was. I was just like, I'd wake up and just be angry. I have to call out of work. Because I deal with customers, like I deal with people
Yeah.
every single day. So, and I'm a manager, so I can't bring that into work.
You can't have a bad day, like
I can't have a bad
like
day.
some professions.
Right.
Exactly. And then some of the higher ups, they're kind of insensitive to the stuff that was going on. And we'll go over that touches into another topic that we'll go over. But like it kind of rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. Some of the stuff that they were saying. So these, Mike, I've never gone through anything like this. It's crazy this year. All the stuff that's happened. But Kobe. We
Yeah.
didn't think
We didn't even talk about him.
we haven't talked about Kobe in I don't know how long. I don't know if did Nipsey pass this year too, or was that last year?
Nah, that was
I
last
think it was
year.
last year, right?
Year.
But it's like it seems like it's back to back to back stuff.
John Witherspoon from
John
Friday.
Witherspoon, yeah,
Right.
it's just every month there's something else that we kind of have to get over as a people, and it's been a rough 2020, and I'm looking forward to the second half, hopefully getting better. I don't see it getting better anytime soon as far as like the COVID. I feel like people aren't really taking that serious enough, so we might end up regressing back into what we just came out of. But hoping that things do change.
And I think that goes back to the uncertainty of everything. Like it's just a lot that we'll have to see play out within the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Yeah, time will tell.
So as far as like what's going on right now, how do you guys feel about the looting and the riots and stuff like that? Well, not so much the lootings anymore. You don't really see that on TV as much. But I should say the protests. I don't want to be like the media where they lump everything in together. How do you guys feel about the protests?
I think the protests are overwhelmingly positive from the things that I've seen, like boots on the ground efforts that I've seen. A lot of them have been overwhelmingly positive. They usually are with a good message. They have a bunch of young people just out here, pouring out their hearts about all the stuff that's going on or situations that they've had on their own that they had felt some way about in the past, and that situation that they've encountered, and just being able to speak out about that and having a medium and a platform to be able to speak about those things has been really positive. um I feel like a lot of the media and coverage about it has died down a bit because of how positive it is.
Hmm.
I really think that's really the narrative that's being cast about now. Like, we haven't been seeing any of the protests that have been going on over the past week or so on the news because there isn't that controversy that's going on. And I think that's one of the reasons why that narrative is starting to get muddled down, is because, okay, there isn't that controversy now, or there's no controversy that we can make up or spin. So what do we do now? Like, do we just keep telling people that protests are still going on? Because they are still going on,
Hmm.
but you're not getting that media traction anymore because that controversy is dying down. These are mostly peaceful protests that I've been seeing online and taking a part of, and quite frankly, some news outlets don't want to see that. They want to see the controversy because they want people to kind of question the narrative and try to spark up a different narrative than what's actually going on. And I hope that doesn't take away from all the stuff that's going on, but I can see how those things can be spun and, that narrative dying away. And I really hope that doesn't happen. I hope people keep going out, doing what they're doing as far as the protests, keep them peaceful, because the more peaceful they are, the less that they can say about what's going on. And I think that that's a positive thing overall.
Now, I got a quick question before you go, Mike. Do you think that we need so 2020? We're more on our phones when we're watching TVs. Do you think we need television to be showing us that we're still peacefully protesting? Can't we use our camera phones to show that?
No, we need.
I mean, we do. I mean, if you look on Twitter, that's all you see left and right. You see people that are making tweets like, "Hey, don't forget, we're still protesting." Like, don't let anybody tell you that these things aren't still going on. There's still peaceful protests going on, but you're not going to hear about it. And that's true. Honestly, if it wasn't for Twitter or for other social media that I'm on, I wouldn't be hearing about it right now because I haven't heard about it. Like, and I don't watch the news that often, but I watch it every now and then, just kind of see what's going on. But honestly and frankly, I haven't heard about any peaceful protests that have gone on in at least the past 2 weeks.
So they're not
I
protesting
don't know
in
what
your
anybody else
area?
can say.
Are they
They're
protesting?
protesting.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I attended a protest last week.
Oh, okay. And how'd that go?
It was good. There are some other things that I'd like to say about it, but there were 2 different protests going on at the time. Matter of fact, it was on 45's birthday. They had a protest that day, and there wasn't a lot of traction that got pulled about that protest because it was mostly peaceful,
Okay.
and nobody talked about it. They decided to protest at Lafayette Square, which is out front of White House, as some people would know. I wasn't directly there. I was a part of another protest that dealt with a lot of the HBCUs and Black Greek organizations that came together on the National Mall. But you didn't hear about either of those 2 things. I didn't see anything on the news about all the Black Greeks getting together on National Mall. It was a significant amount of people, and you didn't hear anything about the protests that happened at Lafayette Square because obviously there wasn't tear gas thrown around and other things going on, so you weren't going to hear about it. That's what I think the narrative is starting to being spun. Like, if something were to have gone down, then you definitely would have heard about it. But the fact is, like, if there's nothing to spin the narrative on, 9 times out of 10, some media sources aren't going to cover it. And I haven't, unless you guys have. You guys can tell me if you have seen anything over the past couple of weeks on mainstream news about any protests going on. I haven't seen anything.
I've seen more Candace Owens.
I'm not going there.
I'm just keeping it.
No, we keeping it real. We're keeping it real.
Keeping it real. Like, I've seen more Candace Owens than I've seen about the actual movement and about the peaceful protests. I think regardless of whatever we try to do to gain equality and equity in this country, I think the narrative will always be shifted to, well, what about this, or what about looting, and whatever the case may be. And it's really unfortunate because all we're asking for is to be treated as equals. You know what I mean?
Isn't that the crazy part?
We're not asking for we're not asking for anything unheard of. We're not even trying to get back of what was taken from us. Could you imagine if we were trying to get back what we felt like was taken from us?
Our 40 acres and a mule.
That we were promised.
We were promised. Never delivered.
Could you imagine if we were trying to get that? All we're trying to get is for people to see us as equals. And it's just sad that the narrative would always be, well, what about black on black crime? What about, the looters? What about, the flag? What about the people that have sacrificed X, Y, and Z? And it's just frustrating. And, I think this generation behind us, I want to say like 18, 17, 19, 20. I think they call them Gen Z.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely big shout out to that generation because they're out there,
They're definitely out there.
They're restless. They're out there. You know what I mean? Like that. That's what's up.
So I'm gonna risk sounding very uneducated. Um, what tripped me out the most? I was coming from work, and they were saying they were protesting the area, and the crazy part was there were no minorities in the people that were protesting. It was
Yeah.
all it was all white people, and like I drove past that, and I was just, like I laughed. It's like, wow, like I think people are finally starting to see that it's not just us, minorities that are suffering from this. It's like, we have allies, that are out there fighting for us, and I laugh because it's like it's crazy that it's come to this for people to start seeing that.
Yeah, because this is the thing, and I've been preaching it left and right to people close to me. Like, yes, we can be absolutely upset and talk about how we see all these companies and stuff speaking about what's going on and the injustice that is out here, and be upset and say, well, how can they figure this out sooner? Why are people acting like black people just came out? Like all these different narratives and talking about these different things. Yes, there's a reason to be upset about that, but you got to understand this too. The case with George Floyd, the reason this case is different, and I'm not saying that this case hasn't happened before. It's definitely happened multitudes of times, too many to count, with names that I half of them I can't even recall right now. But the reason why the George Floyd case was different is because no right-minded person with good intentions of not wanting to be racist XYZ can deny 8 minutes and 46 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No right-minded person that has a right mind and no preconceived notions of other things going on or a history of anything that has to do with racial boundaries being crossed, whatever. You can't deny 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what that person did at that point. Yeah. 8 minutes and 46 seconds, it gets borderline inhumane. Yeah. It's not even a matter of race anymore. When you see somebody kneeling on someone for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, it gets under your skin to the point where it's like, this isn't even a race thing. This is just humanity. Like, treat the dude like a human. It doesn't matter what he did. The only way that I can see an exception for that, if this man went in and killed 20 people in a church.
But it doesn't even matter if he did that, because we've seen where people have sat down and prayed. You realize
what I just said?
Yeah.
If you kill 20 people in a church, that'll probably be the only time where I can say, okay, yeah, he deserves that. But even some people will be like, no, he doesn't necessarily deserve that. He should go through the court of law. No. You can't deny 8 minutes and 46 seconds as a regular human being of somebody kneeling on somebody's neck for that amount of time and you watching the whole thing play out. No breaks. No movie magic, nothing that can you can sit there and say
it's a lynching.
Right. For 8 minutes. And there's nothing that you can say to dispute that it actually happened. There's no type of thing where, the camera panned away. Oh, snap. Something happened. Somebody played this out or they replayed a clip. It didn't really happen for 8 minutes and 46. It's indisputable. And that's the reason why that the reaction this time around is so much different. I can guarantee you, if Trayvon Martin's death was caught on camera, for him being at the age that he was, and that if that whole predicament was caught on camera, people have reacted way differently that were on the fence before than they did in the past.
For sure.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, so let's get into the next topic, and this one's actually me and Trevor had a nice conversation in our group chat about this. It's, I don't want to get this incorrect. It's the whiteness theory, Trevor. Okay.
Whiteness theory.
Do you want to explain what this is for people who may have not heard this before?
All right, so to keep it simple, in layman's terms, whiteness theory is pretty much the theory and understanding that there is a social construct when we talk about whites and blacks. And this social construct is an understanding of what whiteness is and that it's an actual construct, because some people don't believe that it's a construct. But the construct of whiteness, you have to understand that whiteness, when you look at it from that perspective, is this wide construct, and understanding that there was a social status that Americans have when you talk about white people, because of the history of America and all the things that America was built on, all the things that, you know, America has seen and progressed throughout the stages of its lifetime, has benefited, you know, disproportionately, it's benefited white Americans. And it's a social construct in that you got to understand that just all those things that have happened to America and all those things that have created this status because of all of the history that's happened in America, it favors whites. And it's not really a thing where, you know, it's like a blame game or anything like that. It's just something that is understood when you talk about the history of America. When you go deep into the history, it's ever so present in every single thing that's happened to America. And a reason a lot of people haven't heard about it, or a reason a lot of people don't talk about it, because it's a challenging conversation to have when you talk about whiteness theory. Whiteness theory is a theory that needs to be achieved by white Americans, because it's almost a self-reflection, but it's a very challenging self-reflection to have. And that's why it's not talked about often, because it's pretty taboo. Like, it's something that gets that's hostile. It's always a hostile response when you try to introduce the topic of perceived whiteness or whiteness theory to a person that's not of color. So, for example, let's say, Trey, you're a big Bulls fan. Let's say I talk to a Chicago native and I walk up to them and tell them, "Hey, so yeah, the six titles that the Bulls won didn't count because there was a backroom deal with the NBA commissioner, and they managed to find a way to write a narrative to allow them to win 6 championships. So every single championship that Michael Jordan won was invalidated." How would you respond to that?
That's some bullshit.
You'd be pissed. You would absolutely be pissed. You'd be like, no, 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 get the hell out of here. Like, no, I'm not listening to that. Like, there's no way in hell that I'm going to believe anything like that happened. You're going to get that same amount of hostility when you talk about whiteness theory, because it's a difficult conversation to have, and with somebody, and tell them that a lot of the fabrics of understanding that that their, you know, past has been built on has been skewed, or it's been skewed in their favor, or they've been lied to about certain things. And having the status that they have, and finding out that that status was promoted by things that gave them more of an advantage, it's a difficult conversation to present that to somebody when they're not in a place of being able to understand that for themselves.
It almost
So
sounds
that's pretty much
like
what it is.
it's them choosing to be um, ignorant to what's actually going on. The way it's described, I know it's not, but like we've had the conversation, and the first thing when you told me about it was, the first thing I said was, "Oh, it's an excuse." It's like excuse for white people to feel like, you know, this is how I grew up. I grew up around all white people. I don't know about the black culture. It's, I don't see it every single day, so it doesn't affect me. So for them to do something, and get away with it, it's because of their white privilege. And then, so the theory of this is them starting to understand that they have white privilege. So to me, it almost sounded like an excuse. And that was my first reaction to it. It caused a lot of, a long conversation
Right.
from it. I don't know if, Mike, I think you're just now coming into this. Do you have any thoughts on what Trevor's saying?
I mean, I think it 100% makes sense if you tell somebody, hey, you had a head start when the entire time they were running the race, they felt like they were just naturally, you know, pass the baton in like an organic way when, other participants didn't get a baton. They had to run the entire race until they passed out and died. And someone had to pick up that baton and, run. And they're just so far behind when, every time they're running that race, they're getting fresh bodies, they're getting advantages like water, Gatorade. And they themselves just think, oh, well, this is just how the races ran for us. We never thought about, how the races ran for them. We never thought about why we were so far ahead. So I mean, I think it makes 100% sense. I don't think it's necessarily an excuse, but I think, like Trevor said, there needs to be self reflection as a country on an individual level. People need to understand the history. I think that's a big thing. Is I can't speak for all cultures, but I think there's a bit of whitewashing that goes on in America that leads people to think that certain things didn't happen, certain advantages weren't had, or maybe they weren't educated on how those advantages were given to them.
So how do we get them
Exactly.
to understand this perceived whiteness? So like for example, Drew Brees. Everyone knows Drew Brees, or most people know Drew Brees. You know, quarterback, New Orleans, plays with pretty much all African Americans. He comes out and says what he says about, players kneeling and stuff like that. And it takes his African American um, teammates to come out and tell him, you know, what you said was wrong, and reason being why it's wrong. Um, so to me, it almost sounds like it takes minorities to get, you know, white white people to understand that they do have white privilege.
So before the expert goes, I'll just give my opinion.
Okay.
I'll say, white people have to personally, they have to hold themselves accountable, and they have to come from a place of understanding. Because I think originally Drew Brees came out and had a stance of defensiveness. So when you start off defensive and you say, well, that flag represents this for me, and then I think what Shannon Sharp said was, Drew, that flag doesn't represent the same thing for everybody, because my granddaddy fought next to your granddaddy, and your granddaddy came home as a war hero. He got the GI Bill, all these different things, and my granddaddy got called some unpleasant words. He didn't come back to the same reality, even though he fought for that same country. So I think, for one, white people have to do some self reflection, and not from a defensive place, but from a place of understanding. And I think, two, we have to relate to them on, well, why do you feel like, we have to understand their thinking? Why do you feel like the flag represents that for you? Okay, well, let me tell you what it represents for me, because I have relatives who lived during that same time of World War, whatever, or, they went through that same period where you look up to your great granddaddies and your granddaddies, and, they were mistreated by those same people. You know what I mean? And I think that's the way the conversation and the way the narrative changes.
Right. And to talk about the Drew Brees topic, it all goes back to understanding the history.
Hmm.
And I think the reason that he did end up having to change of heart is because he had a little attitude check, and understanding that, hey, maybe there's a part of history I hadn't seen before and looked at,
Hmm.
and understanding, where these people are coming from that's different from my approach. And yes, that's one facet of it. I would love to say that that would be the only way of being able to unravel and get a better understanding of all this stuff that's going on, and getting to that level of enlightenment of the whiteness theory, and understanding more about your own white privilege, XYZ. But it's not that simple. I mean, I wish it was, because if it
Yeah, that's
was,
kind
then
of
I
like the
had the
ideal
solution to that.
situation.
Right. If I had the solution to understanding that and debunking that entire thing, whoever gets that would be a millionaire. Like, they would solve all the problems of the world. We have world peace, and we wouldn't see any conflict in the world. But it's a lot deeper than that. But one layer of it, like Mike was saying, is that it does have to do with understanding the history, and you know reading up on it on your own, and having that conversation with yourself, and understanding that, hey, things might look a little bit differently from what I'm used to, or what I've learned. So maybe hearing it from a different perspective, or looking at different perspectives of it from a third party source, will allow me to get to a point of understanding what's going on. And hey, maybe I do have a different viewpoint on this than I probably should have.
So how do we get them? I know you said you don't have the answer, but how do we get them to get to that point where they need to start looking at other stuff other than their beliefs?
Well, I think the most progressive, I mean, the step that would make the most progress, I feel like, would be getting a better understanding of implicit bias. And I know, we had a brief conversation about implicit bias, so implicit bias is really having different notions or, carrying out different actions amongst yourself that can be perceived as prejudicial, but in your mind, you're not necessarily conscious that you're doing these things. So they can be microaggressions. That's an example of implicit bias.
Mm-hmm.
But other actions or other, preconceived thoughts that we have, when we're talking about different races, you know, implicit bias is present within all of us, no matter what color we are. But, implicit bias is one of those main issues that a lot of people have to deal with and come into taps with, because 9 times out of 10, you're not going to know what those implicit biases you have are if you haven't done extensive digging and understanding of what those are. And it's not as simple as saying, I'm going to sit down and figure out what these implicit biases are. It's much deeper than that.
Mike, you have any comments on that?
I mean, I think that, for one, you have to address your implicit biases, like Nindo said, but you also have to realize that people of color are your neighbor. They're your fellow Americans. You know what I mean? They're your brothers. And when you see your brother is hurting, or when you see your brother is in pain, or when you see, any neighbor in this country is in pain, when you don't look down upon them or you don't have those implicit biases, then you might be able to come from a better place. But when you don't view someone as equal, or when you look down upon them, or you have these implicit biases, then you just say, well, why don't you pull yourself up by your bootstraps? You know what I
Right.
mean? They just genuinely don't care, because they don't look at us as their brother or as their neighbor or as their, sister, or, whatever the case may be. So you have to address that, and then you have to view us as equal. And, why would I care about a stranger more than I care about my brother? You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But if I view
Right.
everybody as my brother, then if I see someone hurting on the street, I'm gonna just reach in my pocket. Hey, this is the best I could do right now. You know what I mean? Rather than
Yeah.
just looking down to them as a quote unquote homeless person. But when you think about that person as your neighbor, a fellow human, someone who's equal, who may have gone through different experiences than you,
Mm-hmm.
then your whole perception changes from, oh, okay, well, let me not kick this person as I walk past. Let me help this person.
Right. But I think that goes deeper. One thing I will say is I think that goes deeper than just the narrative of black versus white. Like, it is it's very challenging when we think about implicit bias, because 9 times out of 10, implicit bias happens in just normal people. It's really not a matter of people thinking that, X and Y are inferior to me,
Give us an
or,
example for
looking
those who
down.
don't know what the implicit
All right.
bias is.
All right. So, good example. Oh yeah. So I'll use the example that I talked with Mike about earlier. So let's say you are being interviewed randomly by someone, and they ask you to um speak about what a leader looks like. And you have this discussion about what a leader looks like. You start talking about personality traits, but unknowingly you start trending more towards gender roles than what the actual characteristics of a leader are, and those start getting mixed into your answers. So then the person stops you, and then they say, hey, did you realize, like, you started naming more characteristics that aren't necessarily centric for a leader, but more for a male over a female? And then you sit back and you're like, dang, I didn't realize I was doing that. So, that's my bad. That's an example of implicit bias, and then on the opposite end, you have explicit bias, where, like, people's argument, for example, of why a woman can't be president. That's a proper example of explicit bias. They say women aren't great choice decision makers, or women aren't strong-willed enough to hold the position XYZ. That's explicit bias. Explicit bias is going out of your way, knowing consciously exactly what you're saying to demean another person or demean another group of people, and using your voice to make it known. Whereas implicit bias are things that are unconscious, and mostly things that you don't even know that you're thinking about or relating to. And everybody has implicit bias. you got to understand that when we talk about the size of our brains, we only have conscious access to 5% of our brain. 5%. So that other 95% of things and processes going on in our head are all unconscious. We only can tap into 5% of our conscious brain. So when you think about it that way and thinking about it in that perspective, a lot of things or actions that are carried out aren't necessarily meant to be, directly racist, quote unquote, or, prejudicial, but they end up being prejudicial because of the fabric of the understanding that we have from the society that we live in and all the systemic things that are in place. And a lot of people deal with that every day. And we don't think about it that way when we look at it from the grander scheme of things, but it happens more often than not. And we don't really attribute it to that until we really take a step back and look at all the things that are going on around us to really understand, hey, dang, like this is making me think this way. It's really hard to sit back and do that on your own will. Like you can't just have somebody sit down and be like, dang, why do I think of Asian people this way? Or why do I clutch my purse when African American people walk past?
Mm-hmm.
Or why do I check if my doors are locked if I'm sitting at a stoplight and I see a homeless man on the corner? Like it's very difficult for any person to sit down and really analyze implicit biases because they're not to the center unconscious and they're things that you just do off of instinct just because of the upbringing that we've had or the societal norms that have been passed around through media and all these different outlets and things like that. And once you look at it that way and understand it, you're like, dang, man, there's a lot of systematic stuff going on around us that influence how we act, whether we're white, black, Latino, Asian. A lot of the things that are fed through our media, they become pop culture. They become a part of our mind frame and they go into our unconscious brain. And we start doing and acting ways that we're not even conscious of.
I completely agree with that because I don't know if you noticed in the 2000s, a lot of times you would see brothers in like certain movies, just as like, let's say, extras, for example, they would have some cornrows, with a wife beater on and some Tims. But
Right.
it's certain things like that. Like, why did that become a thing all throughout the 2000s? Like, why was that like the thing? And it just goes back to propaganda. You know what I mean? Those like
Yeah.
implicit or explicit biases, and then it becomes ingrained in people's brains that haven't even had a black friend or met a black person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I'm sure middle of America, there's a lot of like implicit biases that have just came from just television because majority of the
Exactly.
black population is on the coast.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons why when we were having this conversation in the past, Trey, about whether just the knowing of what's going on and knowing of history can be attributed to being an excuse. The reason I say that, vehemently, that is not really an excuse is because when you look at our media now, what do you see in our media? If you look at our media right now before all this stuff was going on, you're going to see a narrative that continuously and slowly starts getting painted, whether we really want to accept it or not, or look at it from that way. How am I as a person, if I have no black friends or no associates around me that are African American, how am I supposed to look at what the typical, what the general African American people look like when I look on TV and I see, okay, we had a black president. Oh my goodness, like there's so many advances being made in that department. Are you really going to think of all the stuff that's going on in media that racism is still going on when the media keeps propagating the same pillars of things? You
No,
see black athletes on TV. You see that every so often black CEO that comes on television and talks about something. You see all these things and they feed these things out because they want people to believe and understand that, believe that, integration has happened. There's no
I, I,
segregation
I,
anywhere.
I
It,
completely, not to cut you off,
yeah,
but I
go ahead.
completely understand what you're saying. And so, when we first talked about it, I came at it being more of an excuse, and it probably wasn't. Excuse probably wasn't the right word. Um, I said we should focus more on, granted, they're wherever they're at in the world, and they don't have black friends. But not having black friends doesn't justify you being okay with black men being killed and black women being killed. Just that alone, right there, you're a human being. So any person being killed, regardless of what color, should be an issue with you. And so to say that, oh, because the media portrays us as this or that, to me that sounded like an excuse that, okay, because like you're an adult, you know, when you watch a movie that, that they're fictional characters. Like we all know that they're fictional characters. So when you see something on TV, do you necessarily believe that that's the actual thing? Like that's real? So to me, it was like that's kind of excuse, and people are willing to be, you know, naive to what's really going on because they don't want to face, you know, issues in the past as far as like slavery and what their ancestors done. And
But let me
that's what I was saying about, you know, what we were talking about.
let me ask you this straight. How many times have you left a movie and you felt like you left an alternate reality, or you just came out of a, like you weren't even living in a reality for 2 hours. You were just, you know what I mean, a part of like a cinematic experience. Because every time I go to the movies, that's what happens to me.
Yeah, but after such and such time, you snap back to reality. You know,
Yeah, but
no movie has ever made me. I mean, no movie has ever made me feel like it's okay for white, black, brown, whatever, for them to die,
but
for
let me
them
ask you,
to yeah.
but let me
But
ask you this: what if that same feeling of being in a different reality was your whole life? You know what I mean? Like, what if those biases were passed down generation to generation? There was propaganda being, pushed your way, and your entire reality was that 2 hours, as opposed to us when we go to the movies and we see certain stuff like rom-coms, and then we got to go back to a certain side of town. You know what I mean? Our realities are just two different places, and I'm not saying it's okay. Like, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying there's a lot of like whitewashing. There's a lot of things in our society that are being projected upon us. So I'm not saying it's okay, and I'm not giving anybody a pass, but I'm saying they live in a completely different reality than we live in. You know what I'm saying? Like
no, and
it's two totally different worlds.
I completely understand that. So that can explain why it's cool for the black person who's more qualified to not get the job over, you know, a white man who is less qualified. That's fine. How does that, what you're saying, how does that anyway, okay, someone to be killed on TV or kids to being killed? Like that was where I was coming from. Like, forget everything else. Let's focus on not being killed. You know, I don't, whatever reality they have, there's no way that it's okay for a black man, a black child, a black woman to be killed. And that was
I
my point of view.
I
But the,
agree. I 100% agree. But when they think of us as thugs or animals, as vicious, as aggressive, as, how many times do police officers who carry guns, batons, mace, all these different, um, different vehicles for, uh, stopping someone, how many times do they say they fear for their life?
I mean, that's the easy go to.
But I'm just saying though, like if you think of someone as vicious or aggressive, or you feel like someone can kill you with their bare hands when you have a gun, you're living in a completely different reality. So I'm not saying it's okay, but when
right.
they think of us as less than or animals or aggressive or whatever the case may be, I think that's when it gets to a point where when something like this happens, they just, they don't even bat an eye. They just say, "Oh well,
But like I said, I also think that some of it is them willing to be naive. You see on social media all the time, they're dubbing women Karens. You know, them coming out and saying, "I'm going to call the police. I'm afraid for my life. You're African American," and you're standing there, and they're obviously not doing anything. They're they're weaponizing the police against black men. Like they're doing that because they know what's going to happen. So that's not someone being
that's
naive.
foul. That's foul.
That's
But
that's
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 not the majority though.
that's not the majority. It's nowhere close to majority. We're
no,
talking
but
about we're talking about we're talking about maybe 5% of maybe like 10%. Honestly, I'm accounting for the people that haven't been on TV or media, but you got to understand it from this perspective too, Trey. It all comes back to the narrative that's written out. And you might say that, well, we still see people getting killed. You see more of a narrative of a lot of these people's stories that have been killed not being fully told the first time around. And then by the time that it finally comes to light, it's moot. Like how about the young man that got killed last year? We didn't find out about his full story until a few weeks ago, and now people are mourning over it because they're like, dang, yo, this dude was peaceful. This man was singing to animals, doing all this extra curricular stuff, and he was really a good man. They don't paint that picture in media for any of the people they get killed 9 times out of 10. They don't. They usually tell what the liable cause for the police officer that killed the man. They talk about that for a little bit,
They
but that
show
doesn't even
mugshots.
cover most. Right. They don't even cover most of the news. Think about how many people that got killed that never even made the news. Like we may have talked about 12 cases of police brutality over the past 10 years that actually made mainstream news. So to talk about how people see these people getting killed, they don't see it. They not
No, and I
they don't
agree
see
with
it.
you. And I said that was one of the reasons why I definitely wanted to have you on because, like I said, when we first started talking about it, I'm like, I don't want to hear it. It's an excuse. I'm older, so I'm kind of like, I'm a little bit stuck in my ways a little bit. So for people who may be like that, hearing something like this is good because they can start to see like, okay, yeah, they're living in a completely different reality. Even though I don't think I think a lot of them do know that there's something going on and people choose to not do something, but it would be easier. It would be easier to not um, like accept that they have, the privilege. It would be much easier. But I definitely I'm starting to understand what you're saying as far as like the reality they live in. They don't see it every single day, so whatever they see on TV or social media, can kind of like warp their mind into thinking that we are a certain way. So
And
Absolutely.
I
And
think
go ahead.
sometimes I was gonna say I think sometimes the reality or the perception can change in a way that I've been around a lot of white people and have, I've had a lot of white friends in my life and, throughout all different walks of life. And, one thing looking back, growing up was sometimes white people will put you in like a certain like box, for example, like they'll say, oh, you're not like the rest.
I've heard that before.
That, that,
I'm gonna talk
that,
about that in a second. But go ahead.
that literally shows you that there is a perception. There is, like I said, they think of us as aggressive, whatever the case may be. Oh, you guys can't pull yourself up from your bootstraps, whatever the narrative, the very conservative narrative that, I think that's a good term for it is right now. When they have a friend or, someone who they can relate to and they think, wow, you're a person, you're a friend, you're a good person, you're a human being, I think of you as an equal. You've met my mom, whatever the case may be. They can almost, in a sense, disassociate you from that perception. And I think that's where the issue is that implicit or explicit bias of I have this ideology of what I think a person of color is, or, they're all just hoodlums, ghetto, whatever the case may be. And then when they actually have a black friend, they're like, oh, I actually really like Mike, or I actually really like Trey, or whatever the case may be. You're not like I can't tell you how many times I've heard that.
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, I was gonna actually talk about that in a sec because when we talk about implicit bias, there's three stages of unraveling implicit bias. First one is mindset. There is the mindset, and we've been talking about this for the past 20 minutes, but there's a mindset that has to be changed, and a mindset that you have to come to a realization of understanding, okay, this mindset was put in place by all the things that have been around me. And when we talk about systemic inequalities and systemic racism, like to the average person that's not of color, they don't see it in the same lens because, like I've been saying, the narrative that has been scripted out in even more than just media, but just in general, the narrative that has been scripted out, it's a narrative that doesn't point fingers to it often. And you really have to be reading between the lines to really see a lot of the stuff that's going on to really understand that, oh, a lot of this is systemic. Like there's a lot of systemic things going on. Because if you don't see that, which most people don't, you come to these conclusions like, well, we're in a time and place where we gotten past racism, gotten past slavery, and at this point it's just the mindset of being able to be a go-getter and do these things that you need to do and be that supreme capitalist. There's a false image of capitalism that's been put up for every single American in America. And that capitalist mentality that's been propaganda, like that's been turned into propaganda, is like work harder, you're going to achieve what you need to achieve, and whatever your situation, no matter what your situation is, you're going to be able to get out of whatever bad situation you might have come from. But that's it's not the case, especially for people of color, because there's so many more barriers that we and you know, hurdles that we have to jump over. But a regular person is not going to see that. They're going to see this whole propaganda of America's the place where you can work as hard as you can and get to where you want to be and do all these different things. It's a land of promises and possibilities, but they don't realize that when you look at African Americans, you talk about these goals and you talk about these places where you have to be. We start 15 floors below everybody else that comes into the country because of all these systemic things that have not been brought to light other than slavery, not just slavery. Because if you just talk about slavery, people are going to say, okay, yeah, slavery was over 100 years ago.
You got to get past
we've gotten
it.
past that. We've gotten past that point because of all these things that are going on now. We had a black president for so what? We had a black president. Obama was an anomaly. Do you realize that Obama was the only African American in the Senate when he ran for president? And before him, there was only 5 people that were African American that were even in the Senate at any point in time. You know how many African Americans we have in the Senate right now? 3. 3 African Americans in the Senate. You look at Congress. There's 2 houses. You know, there's 2 levels of the Congress. The Senate's the upper level. Then you have the House of Representatives as the lower level. Obama was the only African American male in that upper house for at least, I think he was the first one in at least like 20 years or 15 years, something close to that. He was an anomaly. So for people to say we're in a different place in time because the media propagandizes that, oh, we have a black president, oh my goodness, so much progress. Yes, it was progress. It was monumental progress in the fact that he even got that far and he was able to get voted into office. But he was still an anomaly. Like
he really came out of nowhere.
He was an anomaly. You look at the picture of the Senate right now, you have Kamala Harris, you have Cory Booker, and you have another gentleman that I can't recall right now. But 3 African Americans in the Senate right now. And what's that? We're 12 years from that point of us having a black president, and we only have 2 more senators. Yeah. Don't that sound real interesting to you?
It's fishy.
Has that picture really changed?
Yeah.
It hasn't. The picture hasn't changed at all. Like, we haven't gotten, like, there's a false narrative of progress that has been portrayed to America for decades. A false picture that has been portrayed that we've progressed so far, we've become much more of a united country, and all the people that, you know, try their hardest not to be racist or try their hardest not to be prejudiced against other people that don't look like them. They try. Like, I really don't believe it's a thing where they just suppress all these memories and believe that, you know, like, I don't want to believe that I'm actually racist. Like, yes, they don't want to actually believe that they're racist or they have any prejudices, but I don't think that they intentionally go out their way to suppress any prejudices that they actually have and try to keep them on the hush hush. Like, I don't think that's really the case. I think that it's more of a matter of all these things being cast around them to paint a different picture than what's really going on. That they start having these unconscious thoughts of different things going on and have a different understanding of where we actually are as a country. To really think, okay, yeah, I thought racism was over. That's really what the whole George Floyd situation did. It woke a lot of people up that thought racism was a small thing. It wasn't a major problem in our country. Because people did think that way. Majority of people thought that way that weren't African American. They thought racism was behind us. We passed the Rodney King riots, XYZ, you know, like racism happens here and there, you know, in sporadic places, but it doesn't happen that often. It doesn't happen in my community.
It's not systemic, yeah.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't happen in my community. It happened in that random place in Missouri or this place over here in Chicago. But, you know, it's not a huge problem. I don't think that that's a big problem. No, the George Floyd case and all other cases that followed up after that, or cases that got brought to light after that became viral, has woken people up in understanding that, hey, this isn't how I pictured America was right now. Like racism is very well alive and way more alive than I ever thought it was at this current point in time. I thought we were past that point. It's a big wake up call. Like I think that we have to understand that and try to break down these implicit biases that we have because we even have them too. But the reason that the ones that white people have are more pronounced is because the way that the system has trickled down and the way the system is right now, there's a lot more white people in power than other people of color. So we see it more and we call it out more because we call it out and be like, that's BS, like that's bias. You show bias to that person or she show bias to that person because X, Y, and Z. And it's easier for us to call those out because we see those people in power enact on their implicit biases more often than not. And all the time, it's not explicit. Sometimes it is. And those are overtly racist people that you deal with.
You touched on people waking up, and I think it's a great segue into our last topic. As far as COVID and sports
Right.
returning, do you think sports returning is a distraction? And if it's a distraction, is it an actual good distraction or is it bad? Because some distractions can be good.
Of course, yeah. I mean, I'll say me personally, I think that sports should come back just off the simple fact that this is their platform. Once they take the jersey off, not to be harsh, but they're just another, the phrase. So I think that athletes need to keep their platform as much as they can, but also if sports aren't going to come back, they need to have a reason. Like they need to demand legislation from Congress. We're not coming back until the police union is stripped of its protective. Like if they had a specific goal, and it doesn't have to be anything unreasonable. Like it doesn't have to be like we're never playing again until we get another black president or whatever the case may be. But if they had a specific goal of, especially as the NBA and the NFL, which are predominantly black leagues, that drive the culture, play the skill positions, and whatever the case may be, if they were to say we're not coming back until there is police reform in Congress, you know what I mean? Like, and they, that might be too far of a reach, but just something like give us a goal, because what you're doing is you're almost stripping away your platform that's got you in this position of power to negotiate. You get what I'm saying? Like, if I'm not dribbling the basketball anymore, well, what? I mean, yeah, you have money and yeah, you may have followers, but like you're losing your platform. So I think they still need to keep their platform. I don't think people are not going to go to protest because they're playing in empty gyms with no fans.
Hmm.
That's just me personally, and I think it'll be beneficial to just give us a little taste of something that's good. You know what I mean? Like right now, like I talked about, there's so much uncertainty with the I think right now there's a war on racism. I think there's a lot of people who are coming out and being overtly racist, and there's a really strong amount of people who are peaceful and who are just saying we're against that. And so I think right now in this country, it's almost like a war on racism. We have an election in November. We have a pandemic that we thought we were kind of, getting past, but we don't know where that's at. So, I think sports would be a good thing, just to give us a little bit of something, just because there's so much anxiety, stress, tension. I don't think sports coming back would be a bad thing, but I think if they do come back, use that platform because that's what's gotten you into this position of power.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I don't have an issue with sports coming back. However, I do think that there needs to be an agenda when they do come back. Like, and the agenda doesn't have to necessarily reach all the way to DC to the White House, whatever. Like, they need to have an agenda within their own bounds of their company. Like, let's talk the NFL for example. I know the NFL had a little whisperings when all this stuff had gone down about talking about giving bonuses to organizations that hire black coaches or
An extra
whatever it may
draft pick.
be. Yeah.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
like compensatory packages, stuff like that. Like I know one person is gonna look at that and be like, "Oh, it's just a token thing. Like it's just for them to say that they have a good business X Y Z." But no, I mean when you look at it from another lens and look at it from a different point of view, that integration is important and it's not something to be taken lightly. Like I don't take decisions to further integrate your company lightly. Like the situation where who was it? Serena's husband, the co-founder of Reddit, has stepped down from his board position to allow for a person of color to be chosen to be a part of the board. A lot of people will be, condescending against that and say that was just
That's affirmative
performative.
action.
No. They would say it's more of a performative act, like like
Oh,
the like all those people all those people that were in DC freaking taking a knee and wearing the kente cloth. That was performative. I
that was
would
performative.
that was 100% performative. But doing something like stepping down from the board to allow for a person of color to be on that board is way more than performative, in my opinion, because that integration, when we're coming back to the whole topic of implicit bias and stuff like that, that integration is important because, like I said, everybody has implicit biases. If you don't introduce somebody else to the table that has different biases than you do, then how do you expect to even get past the point of having challenges with diversity? You're not going to get past that point, because as hard as you may go for saying, hey, I'm for everybody, I'm for just treating people right, you're still going to have biases at the end of the day. And those biases have to be challenged by somebody that has different biases than you do. And if you're going to put somebody in a high position or have to make tough decisions that might affect different cultures that you're not familiar with, you got to have somebody at the table or somebody in the room that's going to be able to speak up and speak to from their perspective to say, hey, I don't know if that's the right way to go with this decision. Or, hey, maybe we should tweak this a little bit because I don't think it's necessarily sensitive to these parties or these groups of people. I don't think that it's just a ploy for people to say, hey, we're more diverse. Hey, give us our diversity card. Better Business Bureau, I know you see this going on, but I think it's more of an effort that needs to be made on all fronts, whether it's in sports or in just other major companies, where we got to integrate more of these systems, because systematically, the people that are in place have been systematically placed there because of all the inequalities that are in the country. That's why we don't have a lot of Black owners. And it's no excuse at this point in time that we only have the little number of Black coaches that we have right now. There's no excuse under the sun that can make me understand why we have so little Black coaches in the NFL.
Former guys that have played the game can't even, become head coaches for the most part.
Yeah, and then we talk about owners. Okay, I understand owners. That was systemic. I mean, systemically, the owners are majority white because that's where the money is. I mean, I'm gonna just be frank. That's really how it is. But when we're talking about coaches, the reason that's happening is because there's not enough integration at the hierarchies of the league. You don't have enough people that are in those front offices that are people of color to be able to speak and say, hey, like, this needs to be more equitable. Like this decision process of us picking a coach needs to be way more equitable, because we know there's a lot of talented coaches out there, but why is it that most of them aren't people of color? Because a lot of the people that are above those coaches aren't represented in our people of color. They're not represented.
But let me ask you this though, Trevor. We saw the Rooney Rule where I think you were supposed to interview one minority candidate. I think we saw that like didn't
That's
work.
a joke.
Yeah, it was a joke. You know what I mean? They
right. Because who's interviewing them?
Who's even taking it serious? Like, are they interviewing?
Who are the people that you're putting at the table to interview the minority candidates?
Not
minorities.
Not minorities, exactly.
Yeah. So what do you expect to solve? That's the point. That's the problem. That's the root of the problem. And a lot of people don't see that as the problem. They say, well, we're going out, we're getting candidates that are people of color, but who do you have evaluating these people of color?
But that goes back to what you were just saying about the guy stepping down from Reddit not being performative. Exactly. So when I heard that, I'm like, okay, that's cool, but he's clearly an ally. I would rather him be in a position of power and promote, people, Black people or minorities into higher positions. So when he stepped down, he's still on the board. When he stepped down, he recommended that the next person be a minority. So him being on the board is only one voice. We don't know who, we don't know how the other people on that board are. They could not be an ally. So now he's outnumbered as opposed to like getting someone else that's a minority coming in, moving up in the company. So like I commend him for doing that, but I think that he may have hurt the promotion of minorities by actually stepping down with his position of power. I think he should have um, maybe did a little more thinking as far as like what he could have done to get people in there.
I somewhat disagree, and the reason I disagree is because when you look at it from the perspective of understanding that, hey, we can't. Okay, this is one thing we can't do. One thing I don't want to do is assume that the other people that he was on the board with don't have any type of like,
Oh no,
don't
definitely
have
not.
the same
Definitely
type
not.
of moral structure that he has.
Yeah,
Because
definitely not.
that would be making a blind assumption and believing that maybe he was the only person on that board that felt the way that he did. Because that might not necessarily be the case. He might have been the only person on that board that had the amount of sway and the amount of power within the company to be able to make that decision for himself. And I think that's why he did it. When you think about it that way, when you think about it from the perspective that yes, he was a co-CEO of the company. Like we're talking about a co-CEO of the company, he has more power than 99% of the company. He knew that in his place of power, that he would have more of a flexibility to be the person that's going to decide. I'm going to step back and allow for somebody else to come to the table that has different ideas and to be able to speak to what it means to be an African American or a person that's a minority or a person of color, and understand that from analyzing what his own position is within the company. That's a powerful thing to do, and everybody's not going to be able to do that. Every person on that board probably wasn't in the place to even be able to make that decision for themselves and decide that they were going to do that. But for him to have the status that he has as being the co-CEO and being one of the owners of the company and the creators of the company, he probably looked inside himself and thought like, I'm one of the few people that's probably able to even do something like this. So why don't I use my position in that board to make a statement and understand that, hey, we need to mix up the room. We need to have a different perspective in this room alone. And we're not going to get it done by just saying, hey, I'm going to fire these two people and demote them and decide, hey, we're going to get rid of these two people and add two more people in. That might not have been the best move for his group. Maybe they all do have kind of similar mindsets, but from his point of view, I think he looked at it and analyzed his point of power that he had and wanted to use that power because he knew that he was probably one of the few people that were able to make a decision like that to do that.
Yeah, I'm definitely not saying fire anyone. I just think as the CEO, he wields more power as far as like starting programs for minorities, leadership programs,
right. And he's still going to be CEO. It's just the board. It's just that that board of directors conversation. Like he'd rather have somebody else in there that's going to have that perspective. Yes, he sympathizes for that perspective. He has a level of empathy and understanding that something like that needed to be done, but he's never going to be able to fully speak to what that perspective is because he's not that group of people.
That's true.
And I think that's what he had to come to understanding of realizing is that, yeah, I can go to bat for these people left and right, and I can go to bat for this group of people and understand that. But like, it's not the same as actually having somebody in that position and being able to speak for that demographic of people.
Now,
And I think
does this put pressure on the board? Does this put pressure on the board to hire someone?
It absolutely does. It shakes the table up. It definitely shakes the table up because then okay, like it wasn't just a recommendation for them to say to get a person of color. That recommendation is a very professional way of saying,
yeah, it better happen.
Hey, look, y'all need to make this happen because I'm taking my position away. I'm mandating that somebody is in here that can speak for this group of people because that's what needs to happen. And a lot of those people a lot of people of color aren't getting those type of opportunities. So I'm going to be the one to say that this opportunity needs to be brought up for somebody who's qualified, and we're putting them in place to be the voice that is different from all the people that are sitting around this table right now. And that needs to happen. And that needs to happen in almost any company that we look at when we look at the hierarchy and see that there are little or no people of color at the top in any of those places, especially NFL, where majority of the players that play are black.
Yeah.
And same in the NBA. No, I don't expect the owners overnight to flip over and half the owners be black.
Yeah,
But
that's not
in a lot of
happening.
those leadership positions, there should be way more people of color than in both of those sports.
Definitely GMs. Definitely
Right.
GMs. Yeah.
Exactly. But there's not, because there's nobody at that table, like Mike was saying earlier, when you say you have these neighbors and people that you come to know and say, hey, this guy's not so bad, or this is, this is a really good friend of mine, XYZ. They don't have those comings going on inside of their own fabrics of their organizations. So it's not gonna happen if that never happens.
Gotcha.
That's just how it is. And that's called debiasing. Debiasing is literally having people the um that go against the stereotype in your visibility. So you meet somebody that isn't like the stereotype, and you get to know them, and you're exposed to them on a regular basis. That's how you get rid of some parts of your implicit bias, because you debias the stereotype that you have for a specific person when you're exposed to them a lot more. But if you're not exposed to them, or you don't have to be exposed to them, then when is it going to happen? It's
I agree.
something that we just have to think about.
Yeah.
Did you have any final thoughts on this one, Mike?
Well, I was just going, play host for a second and just ask you guys, how do you feel about certain things that are going on now in a response to, a lot of, the movement and, everything in terms of like, people who are playing like black characters is like cartoons and TV shows stepping down, them taking
Yeah.
away Paw Patrol. Like, how do we feel about, I think we talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
It almost feels like they're pandering, or it almost feels as if like it's celebratory. How do you guys feel about that?
So the guy, I saw it earlier today. So the guy who plays Cleveland is a white guy. He stepped down. Now, I don't I don't like saying that you can tell someone you probably can tell someone if they're black based off how they sound. But I don't think we should get to the point where someone's doing a good job. As long as he's not like playing like this ethnic role, or he's portraying, you know, a black person as being an idiot or something like that, I'm okay with a non-minority playing a minority role. Um, if he is doing something crazy, then definitely step down. But then again, do I really want a black person acting a fool playing a black character? So I mean, to me, it's kind of like it might be a little overkill. Um, I think people might be doing a little bit too much. I respect his decision to step down, but I think it might be a little too much.
Right. I mean, I look at it from this point of like just empathizing and put myself in that person's shoes. I think things have gotten so out of control with us thinking about all these conversations that are going on, that some of these people are some of these people are taking a step back and looking at what's going on. And it goes back to the conversation we had earlier with understanding that, like, once you get to a point of understanding what has been put in place for you to achieve the certain things that you were able to achieve, when you look at those things, like, we look at them in hindsight and then understand, like, dang, I got this role because of who I am. And, yes, I'm talented. I'm not going to take the talent away from myself, but I did have an advantage in getting this role because of what I look like. A lot of these people are thinking that to themselves. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of these actors and actresses stepping down from their roles, because they're like, dang, I mean, honestly, like, if I was actually black, would I have gotten this role? With all the people that were in the office interviewing me and listening to my audition, those people probably weren't black. The writer Family Guy's not black, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people around him weren't people of color either that were in his circle of
Hmm.
people that were auditioning for voice actors for that show.
The other,
So, go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
No,
I'm
well, I
sorry.
mean, so people would take people. Some people are probably taking a step back and thinking to themselves, like, dang, like, all the advantages that have systematically been put in place for me and this industry has allowed me to take advantage of being able to get these roles better than some others. And looking at that from that view, and then portraying somebody that is of a different race, it's kind of like, dang, well, where's the representation? We don't have the representation on this show. So wouldn't it be fair to have, somebody that would actually be representative of the people that they're speaking for as a voice actor for a person of color, other than somebody that's not? Like, the representation is just all screwed up, and people are starting to finally like take a step back and realize it when they see all these issues are going on and all the inequalities going on. A lot of people are really finally understanding the inequality level that the US is at right now. And I think that's what 2020 has really been about. And a lot of us don't want to believe it. A lot of us think that, people knew all this stuff was going on and wanted to repress it and suppress it. But a lot of people didn't know that this inequality was still really going on. It's not because they chose not to. It's because the narrative that's been getting written out has said otherwise. Like, all this narrative is saying, in the news that, everything's fine. We're not doing anything to people of color or black people. They're doing it to themselves. They're putting each other down. Not putting down. That doesn't happen anymore. But that's nowhere close to the case when you're looking at all these police brutality cases. And I think people are starting to see that now, that there's still a lot of inequality in so many different systems and so many different industries that are paramount to the United States, especially comedy.
I think it's tricky though. So if we're asking white people to not play black characters, are we doing the same for black people and minorities to not play white characters? Because the Freddy from what show you guys might not know, but from a different world, plays like 40 different characters, and I want to say 80% of the characters that she plays are white. So are we taking her job away?
I mean, why? I mean, I'm not being, I'm not being coy saying this, but why would we?
I mean, if we're talking about equality,
right,
it's got to be equal both ways, right?
Not necessarily, because there's still a disproportion of white people to black people in those industries that you're speaking about. So them playing those roles, there's still a minority, and there's still an anomaly in the bigger picture of, pop culture. And when we're talking and specifically to this television, like, it'd be a much different story if it was majority black people on television. But just because just even having that person that's a person of color on their show just speaks to at least having that type of representation. But I do get where you're coming from. I do understand that you're saying, like, playing these roles is kind of fishy. But I also go back to saying that I haven't really seen like an outcry of people asking for these people to step down from the roles. A lot of the ones that I've heard, and this isn't all of them, but a lot of the ones that I've heard have come to this decision mostly on their own after seeing what's going on. There have been a few, well, not necessarily in acting roles, but like a few YouTubers like Jenna Marbles. Jenna Marbles just said that she's stepping away from YouTube because she got called out. That's one of the situations where I say, yeah, she got called out for doing a lot of racially inappropriate things that kind of stepped and teetered on the lines, like, borderline blackface, stuff like that. Like, yeah, like that was the cancel culture calling her out. And do I think 100% that that's okay? I don't know. It depends on the case, because I like, this is not me giving excuses to any of these people, but it depends on the case, because like there was a long time ago, right. You say, oh, there's a long time ago it happened, blah blah blah. I can't say that for every person, like, I don't really know these people personally, and I'm not gonna go to the point to say, well, it was so long ago she's learned her lesson. I don't know if she's learned her lesson.
Yeah.
But I can't be the first one to jump in and say, oh yeah, cancel, like, you're a piece of trash. Like, unless they did something that was like overtly racist. We were talking about implicit bias, and we've been talking about implicit bias. There's a lot of implicitly biased things that comedians have either done, or just people that have been in pop culture that have done, and we haven't gone to the lengths of digging back in their history and canceling them for it. Yeah. Same thing with the Kevin Hart situation. It's the Kevin Hart situation. Kevin Hart has done a lot of implicitly biased things. Like, they weren't just completely overtly racist things that he's done, or overtly prejudiced things that he's done. It's just, he just said certain things that were based on the fabric of all the stuff that he sees in society.
At that time,
people tried to drag him for it. Right? Yeah. That's what I'm saying. And people tried to drag him through the mud for it. And this happened years ago. but we're in a different culture now. Like people are really quick to cancel people and try to go out their way for this. But a lot of these actors that you were speaking of, a lot of them, it's to me that I've seen, haven't really been getting harassed about playing the roles that they're playing.
Yeah,
Like
they're doing it themselves.
they've been kind of going on their own, and it takes a lot of self like analysis to do something like that, and I respect them for that. I really do. Like I don't think it's a performative thing from my point of view, because I'm like, it really took a lot for you to stand up and be like, yo, like we don't have the representation that we should have on this show as far as diversity goes. Even though the shows is diverse, I'm playing a dude that I'm not even the ethnicity of.
Yeah.
So like there's something jacked up about that, and I don't want it to be that way anymore, because all this stuff that's been going on lately is showing me that things aren't right in America, and it's not, everything is not as equal as it's been preached out to be, and I gotta respect those people for that.
Okay. Mike, you're playing host right now. You have any other any other questions?
No, I just wanted to address that because my personal opinion is that I just want actual real change. You know what I mean? Like I want Black actors to get more lead roles. Like I don't want this to become a celebratory parade instead of being real change, and that's what it's all about. It's not about just appeasing with, oh, I'm going to step down from playing Cleveland. It's like, no one had an issue with you playing Cleveland, and that's not what this movement is about. But there are some actors or actresses who haven't had opportunities. So I just don't want it to become celebratory. That's the only reason I prompted that question.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, absolutely.
All right, guys. So the that was actually our last segment. As far as like talking, we're gonna go into something I want to do, on these podcasts. Kind of lighten it up. This was a heavy, a heavy podcast, especially for the first one. But I think it was needed. I definitely think it was needed. So let me just switch over to this.
Yeah, I hope I wasn't rambling too much, man. I can talk about this stuff all day, but
We could go all day. We could go all day.
It's a lot, man. It's a lot. It's a deep game, as one of my favorite professors always used to tell me, man. It's a deep game for sure.
All right, so this part of the podcast is album review. This Tiana Taylor album, I've been listening to since it came out, nonstop, and this is a great album. So I'm going to give it 5 flames. I'm not sure if you guys have heard this album.
Yeah, it's really good. I heard it.
How many flames you giving it?
5, definitely gets 5 flames. Definitely gets
I give it 5 flames too. 2020 has been kind of a rough year for music for me. Like I haven't heard a lot that's been like, oh my gosh, like this is really solid. Like it's not a lot of projects that have come out so far this year that have been like that, But yeah, I definitely think Tiana Taylor's project is probably one of the best I've heard this year so far.
Mike, have you heard the project yet?
I've heard a couple songs, and me, I hate to be that guy, but I can judge a lot of someone's work off of a couple songs, so I'm gonna give it 5 flames.
Okay. Oh, okay. No. So this isn't me hyping up the album because she retweeted my comment. She liked and retweeted my comment. But no, this album, this album is really it's a really good album. But yeah, listen, I want to thank you guys for joining the podcast today. Talking first podcast. Like I said, something I want to do for a very long time. I appreciate everyone that's been in the chat talking, supporting me. I really truly appreciate it.
One more question before we close out.
Go ahead.
I think we talked about this before, that we wanted to talk about this before we closed out. But if the Lakers win a championship, is there an asterisk that goes on it?
Listen, listen. Let me back up. I'm a Jordan fan. I'm definitely a Jordan fan. And LeBron winning another championship, he's definitely going to get closer to being in that conversation of GOAT. But if players are sitting out, and we're talking about key players sitting out, it's got to have an asterisk next to it.
I gotta agree. Like, I know some people back in the day was trying to argue on that shortened season that we had with the lockout, and people were like, man, there's an asterisk next to that for the Heat. But nah, that's not the same. This is
No,
completely different, bro. We're in a different situation where, like, you got people sitting out for different reasons. You got people sitting out because they've been affected by COVID, or they want to keep they want to keep healthy. And you got other people that are thinking about sitting out because of all this stuff that's going on in the country with the inequality, and just speaking out about that. So, like, yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm really looking at the NBAs and just kind of be like a thing that's just there for entertainment. Like, I'm not looking too deep into the playoffs, especially if a lot of major key players are sitting out. Like, I'm not really looking at the league coming back for that. I'm more so looking at it as like a thing that just kind of keep me entertained a bit. So I don't know if I could look at this year the same anymore with all this stuff going on. I just don't know if I could do that.
So I think personally that since they played majority of the season, it was only like 20 games left, if that. Yeah. So they played majority of the season, and I think the cream rises to the top. So I'll say everybody who is in a position to make the playoffs has earned that. They grinded. The executives and the GMs who put those teams together, they did a great job with their foresight, and those guys came together. But if LeBron wins, there will be an asterisk. But if anybody else wins, I think it was well deserved. Like the Clippers, hopefully everybody stays healthy, no COVID. Hopefully the Bucks, stay healthy, no COVID. But if the Lakers win, yeah, asterisk LeBron. He's just a dirty champion, man. Just it took the NBA stepping in 2016 and suspending Draymond Green. It took Ray Allen hitting that shot, and then what other championship am I missing? They blew KD off the floor. I'll give him that one. LeBron, hey, they blew KD off the floor. So he's really only won one true championship.
Why do you hate this man?
I don't hate LeBron.
That's a big oof.
I'm just giving my unbiased opinion. I don't hate LeBron James. I think he's a great, probably a top 5 player of all time. But I think when it comes to winning,
hold on, probably.
I mean, he's not done yet. So can I really, can you really say that the painting is beautiful if you haven't, if it's not, finished? So all I'm gonna say is this: great player, great stat guy, but when it comes to winning, I mean, it usually takes a feat for LeBron to win a championship. That's all I say. And I'll sit at my table outside and say, debate me on it.
Sounds like a little bit of bias there, Mike. I don't know.
I don't have any explicit biases.
Okay.
I love LeBron.
Cap.
That's not cap. I love LeBron.
I mean, if you say so. No, but I think we all kind of agree that there's definitely a Mike Bayless. That's funny. I definitely think we all agree that there's an asterisk next to it if the Lakers happen to win. But
yeah, when it comes to that conversation of like, check out the rings, yeah, there's definitely asterisk to that. For anybody else, like, I mean, it wouldn't be that conversation. It's just more of like, may the best man win, and whoever wins at that point. I don't even know if the Lakers would even win, but if they do, yeah, you can't bring this year up in any type of conversation in comparison.
No, I think like the chat said, I think it's not just LeBron though, and we brought up LeBron kind of trying to be funny, but anyone who wins this year, there's definitely an asterisk next to their name. It's not just
I said LeBron was just because it usually takes something like this for him to win.
Yeah, even if it's the Clippers, like, I'm not gonna look at the Clippers and be like, oh yeah, this is the, like, that was it for the Clippers, bro. They climbed up Mount Rushmore. Yeah, they did all this. No, it'll probably be asterisk for them too. Like any of those like top teams, if a lot of the people end up sitting out, like whoever wins this year, to me, honestly, it's not gonna matter that much to me. Like, in the bigger scheme of things, when next year happens, I'm gonna be like, all right, man, let's get a full year this time. Like, I want to see how everything plays out. People have had time to rest up, that's been hurt,
Yeah.
pop back in. People signing new players on their teams. Like everything looks different. Like it's not the same anymore. Like this doesn't even feel like the same season to me anymore.
But I
I
agree
know.
with JJ. I'll say this: that if the playoffs are intense and if it's like hotly contested, then I think we'll probably look at it differently. We're probably all prisoners of the moment right now. I know I am.
Yeah.
We shall see.
All right, guys. Like I said, I appreciate you guys coming through. Everyone in
Appreciate
the
you for
chat.
having us.
Appreciate you
Yeah,
guys.
I appreciate you inviting me, man. This was awesome. Also, opportunity to speak.
All right, guys. So we're gonna go ahead and end it right now. We're gonna be doing these once a week. I'll be sending out notifications on Twitter. So if you are not following me, please follow me at Uncle Trey on Twitter, and you'll get some notifications when we're going live. All right. Appreciate you guys coming through.
Yeah.
Peace.
Thanks, man.
Somewhere on the sea, it got a little longer, so it seems. I burned out some to speak. Now come a little closer. I feel a little light in the light track. I felt a bit of bad, but I came back. There's still a little light in the light track. There's still a bit of good.